Today's video is sponsored by Shudder, the ultimate streaming service for horror movies and series. You could call it the Netflix of horror. Shudder's extensive library is filled to the brim with thousands of hours of chilling content, and with new supernatural terrors, edge-of-your-seat thrillers, and original titles being added on a weekly basis, you're guaranteed to never run out of content to binge. Recently, I've been using Shudder to discover some international gems, like The Sadness, an extremely gruesome Taiwanese movie that follows a young couple fighting to reunite after a plague turns most of their city into bloodthirsty maniacs. And that's just one of the amazing exclusives that I haven't been able to find on other platforms. To top it off, Shudder's also extremely convenient. Their service gives you unlimited access to stream ad-free on all your favorite devices, including iPhone, Apple TV, and Android devices. Simply download their app or stream directly from their site. With a low subscription price of just $5.99 a month or $56.99 a year, with Shudder, it's never been easier or cheaper to fuel your nightmares. To try Shudder free for 30 days, head over to shudder.com and use my promo code LAZY and get started streaming the best horror, thriller, and supernatural content, all completely ad-free. That's shudder.com and use promo code LAZY and start your free month of horror today. So we'll start today's episode off with a mini PSA. I've been making these videos for a long time now, and during my years of researching cold cases and solved cases, I've come to realize a common theme. That a huge number of victims who lose their lives are people who were driven to a second location. It's important for everyone to realize that, no matter what, you can't let that happen to you. As soon as you've been taken to crime scene B, your chances of surviving a violent incident drop to near zero. Unfortunately, when an armed individual tells you not to scream and to get into a vehicle, many terrified people comply with their demands and hope for the best. That's the best strategy during a normal hold-up, sure. Just give them what they want and get away with your life. They want your money, not you. But when a perp's telling you to get inside a car, experts say it's imperative that you do everything in your power not to, even if they have you at point-blank range. Your odds are always better at the primary location, where there are likely other people within earshot, where medical help is close at hand, and where the perp faces the most risk of being caught. So run as fast as you can in a straight line, not in a zigzag. Make as much noise as possible. Kick the perp between the legs. Bite and claw their eyes and ears. And if all else fails and they're physically dragging you, go completely limp and keep shouting as a last resort. Do whatever it takes, but don't get inside that car. With that in mind, today we'll be examining 3 cases which demonstrate why, under no circumstances, should you ever let any would-be captor take you away in a vehicle. November 20th, 1994, 6:45 a.m. 22-year-old Stacey Ray Erickson, a mother of 2, had just dropped both her children off with a babysitter. While on her way to work, she stopped at a gas station in central Jacksonville, Arkansas. While filling up her car, she was caught off guard by a man who quickly and quietly snuck up behind her. This man pulled a firearm on her and told her to sit in the passenger's side seat of her vehicle. She did as he demanded. He then got behind the wheel and proceeded to drive Stacey to 18 separate ATMs across Jacksonville, forcing her to make withdrawals at each of them. These 2 images, captured on one of the ATM's internal cameras, shows a clearly distressed Stacey sitting beside her captor. In total, Stacey handed over $350 to the man in the driver's seat beside her. After the final transaction, which happened at 7:37 a.m., Stacey Erickson disappeared from the face of the earth. She didn't pick up her 2 kids from the babysitter that she had left them with. She didn't make it to work. For just over 2 weeks, her whereabouts and well-being remained a mystery. That is, until December 5th, when her body was discovered by the banks of the Arkansas River, hidden in a shallow grave. She had been strangled and raped. It didn't take long to track down Stacey's killer. In fact, before her remains were found, they already had the guy in custody on separate charges. He was Marcel Williams, a man who had just been released on parole from prison and who had been seen prowling around that very same gas station, attempting to follow several other women. The cops had picked him up on November 29th in relation to 2 other assaults which he had committed since his release. During his interrogation, Marcel actually admitted to picking up and robbing Stacey Erickson, but didn't mention taking the young mother's life. In his version of events, he had let her go and assumed that she was still alive and well. Unsurprisingly, once Stacey's body was located, the police charged Marcel with her slaying. Marcel's defense revolved around his troubled upbringing. He'd been raised by his mother and stepfather, who, according to him, had treated him despicably. They would wake him up in the middle of the night and beat him with extension cords and belt buckles. They even forced him to help pay for utility bills by pimping him out to grown women in their 30s and 40s. These claims were backed up by Marcel's former high school English teacher, who spoke on his behalf during the trial. These experiences had led Marcel to act out, and after a slew of crimes, he wound up in an adult prison at the age of just 15. Inside, he was repeatedly tormented by the other much older inmates, which obviously resulted in him developing even more psychological issues. That was the prison he had just been let out of before taking Stacey's life. Marcel's nightmare childhood wasn't enough to convince the jury to spare his life though, and he was sentenced to death in 1997 after a lengthy trial that involved multiple appeals. Marcel remained on death row for 20 years, almost the same length of time that his young victim Stacey got to live her life. Just 1 month prior to his execution, Marcel finally admitted to being fully responsible for what happened to Stacey. "I wish I could take it back," he said, "but I can't." He begged for clemency, claiming to have let the Lord into his life, but his request for mercy was denied. Marcel ate a final meal of fried chicken, banana pudding, nachos with chili cheese and jalapeno peppers, 2 Mountain Dews, and potato logs with ketchup. On April 24th, 2018, the 46-year-old was led out to the death chamber and strapped to a gurney. A lethal dose of midazolam was administered into his veins at 10:16 p.m. By all accounts, things didn't go smoothly, with onlookers saying that Marcel appeared to be in pain, arching his back and breathing heavily. He was pronounced dead 17 minutes later at 10:33 p.m. "18-year-old Kelsey Ann Smith was last seen alive while shopping at a Target in Overland Park, the second largest city in Kansas. She entered the store at approximately 7 p.m. on June 2nd, 2007. Kelsey had gone there specifically to buy her boyfriend a present. The couple were celebrating their 6-month anniversary, and Kelsey wanted to get him something nice to commemorate the occasion. As she perused the aisles, Kelsey chatted on the phone to her mother, discussing possible gift ideas. But unbeknownst to Kelsey, she wasn't browsing those aisles alone. A young male in a white shirt and dark shorts was caught on CCTV entering the Target about 30 seconds after Kelsey. The man proceeded to follow her around the store, often looking up in her direction, but being as discreet as possible and keeping his distance. None of the other customers, nor Kelsey for that matter, noticed his unusual behavior. He followed her down every aisle she went down and appeared in almost all of the same footage as she did. Kelsey picked out a nice present for her boyfriend, paid for it at the register, told her mother that she would see her very soon, and hung up the phone. She exited the store at 7:07 p.m., hoping to make it to her boyfriend's house by 7:30 like they had planned. Since the Target was only an 8-minute drive away from her boyfriend's home, he immediately became worried when 7:30 rolled around and she still hadn't arrived. Kelsey always let people know when she was running late. He called her and sent her texts, but got no reply. At about 8 p.m., he called up Kelsey's dad, Greg, who worked in law enforcement. Greg, in turn, called all of the local police stations and hospitals, and the search for Kelsey was underway almost immediately. About 4 hours later, Kelsey's car was found across the street from the target where she had last been seen. Her wallet and her purchases were inside, but there was no sign of the young woman anywhere. Detectives quickly began dusting the car for prints, and after eliminating those that belonged to her parents and her boyfriend, they were left with the prints of an unidentified person who didn't appear on their forensic database. As such, they got in contact with Verizon Wireless to pinpoint where Kelsey's phone had last pinged. That would give them a good idea of her last verifiable location. Verizon were less than helpful, and it took the company 4 days to comply with the detectives' requests. Eventually, they got on board with the investigation and were able to track Kelsey's phone during the time she went missing. They told the authorities to search 1.1 miles north of a particular cell phone tower. And just 45 minutes later, on June 6th, searchers discovered Kelsey's body near Longview Lake in Grandview, Missouri. She was covered in sticks arranged in the shape of a pentagram. Forensic experts confirmed that Kelsey had been strangled by her own belt, as well as raped. By all accounts, Kelsey Smith was a vivacious, vibrant, and lovely person. Having just graduated from Shawnee Mission West, she was preparing to go to K-State University and was eager to play clarinet in the marching band. But tragically, that future had just been taken from her. To try and identify Kelsey's killer, the investigators turned their attention to the target's CCTV cameras. One thing you may not be aware of is that Target actually has their own internal forensic services division, who have the capability to enhance their surveillance footage. As a result, they were able to provide the authorities with this clear recording of the perp's face and movements. The footage clearly showed the man pull up into the store's parking lot shortly before Kelsey arrived. It recorded him entering the store just after Kelsey and leaving just before her while she was paying for her gift. Outside, he quickly went to his truck to retrieve a firearm. After Kelsey left the store at 7:07 p.m., he waited for her to get to her vehicle and then ran up to her. He ordered her into her passenger side seat and subsequently drove off with her to the area where her body was later found, approximately 20 miles from the store. After taking her life at the remote second location, he drove her vehicle back to the target, left it there at 9:17 p.m., and drove away in his own truck. The authorities released this footage to the public, and in response, they received thousands of tips. 2 calls in particular proved to be the nail in the perp's coffin. One from his own co-worker, and the other from his neighbor. These calls led detectives to the house of a 26-year-old man named Edwin Hall, and it would soon become apparent that he was the man that had taken Kelsey's life. While at work, Edwin and one of his co-workers happened to be watching the news when images of the suspect's truck appeared on screen. This co-worker looked outside the window to Edwin's vehicle, looked back at him, and asked, "Hey, isn't that your truck?" Edwin had no answer to that. Instead, he got up, told his boss that he was feeling sick, and swiftly drove back to his home. When the police arrived, Edwin and his family were in the process of packing bags and getting ready to leave town. He was taken in for questioning and had his fingerprints taken. In Edwin's basement, investigators found a bizarre, ritualistic shrine, and on his MySpace page, he described his interests as eating small children. Given the shape of the sticks found over Kelsey's remains, some speculated that there may have been a ritualistic or sacrificial motive to the case, and the shrine found in Edwin's basement seemed to line up with that theory. During his interrogation, Edwin said that he was indeed at the target that fateful day, but claimed that he never approached or interacted with Kelsey in any way. He was then asked why his fingerprints were found on a seatbelt in Kelsey's car. Again, he had no answer for that. As it would turn out, Edwin had a history of violence as a juvenile. He had been adopted at the age of 7, but was returned to state custody at 15 after threatening his sister with a blade. He had also hit another young boy over the head with a baseball bat. In the end, Edwin struck a plea bargain to avoid the death penalty. He gave a full confession, saying that this had simply been a crime of opportunity. a case of Kelsey being in the wrong place at the wrong time. He saw Kelsey walk into the store alone, thought she had nice legs, followed her inside to make sure she wasn't meeting anybody, and then decided to snatch her in the heat of the moment. In his words, he thought she was 12. In exchange for that sickening confession, Edwin was sentenced to life behind bars without the possibility of parole. Once this case was closed, the Kelsey Smith Act was passed into law in most states. Cell phone companies are now required to ping a phone if asked to do so by the authorities, provided they have reason to believe a person's life is in mortal peril. Prior to Kelsey's demise, phone companies were under no obligation to assist with such matters. Gordana Kotevsky was described by those closest to her as a perfect child if ever there was one. Ambitious, intelligent, and full of spirit, Gordana just had that spark, and it was clear that the bubbly 16-year-old had a very bright future ahead of her. She lived with her parents and siblings in the Lake Macquarie region of New South Wales, Australia. On the night of November 24th, 1994, Gordana departed the Charleston Square shopping centre and began walking down Powell Street towards her Aunt Sonia's house, just 500 metres away. Although several homes line the sides of Powell Street, there are stretches where only trees and brush flank the road. A young girl walking by herself at night would have been easy prey on that road. At 8:45 p.m, two men in a light-coloured, single-cab Toyota Hilux with a silver work tray attached drove up beside Gordana. According to 6 eyewitnesses, one of these men jumped out and began dragging her towards the vehicle where his accomplice was waiting behind the wheel. She was forced inside, and the men sped off with her. Gordana's shopping bag and wallet were later found at the scene, but she was never seen or heard from again. Aside from a detailed description of the suspect's vehicle, the authorities had little to work with. They asked all of the witnesses to undergo hypnosis to try and draw out any details about the two men who took Gordana. One of them was able to give a detailed description of the perps involved, and these two efforts were made up. They were both young and athletic. Unfortunately, none of the witnesses could recall their license plate number. 300 owners of Toyota Hiluxes in the area were interviewed and had their vehicles searched, but this didn't result in any arrests. It's unknown what exactly became of Gordana. Some believe she was killed and buried in the outback. Others think that she was trafficked and sold to the highest bidder. Whatever became of her, after 28 years with no contact, it's safe to assume that she is no longer alive. The coroner's office agreed with that, and in 2003, Gordana was declared legally dead, despite the fact that her body has never been discovered. Ambiguous loss is difficult to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it, said Gordana's mother, Peggy. It's a loss that never brings closure and leaves you grieving the child that didn't make it to adulthood. Part of you is missing forever. There's a strong possibility that Gordana's case is linked to 3 other missing girls from the Lake Macquarie region. Amber Robinson, 14, Leanne Goodall, 20, and Robin Hickey, 18. They all vanished between December 30th, 1978 and April 21st, 1979. And just like Gordana, their fates remain unknown. Interestingly, Gordana's sister, Carolina, told officers about a phone call that she received from Gordana just 2 weeks before she disappeared. During that call, Gordana mentioned a customer at the delicatessen that she worked at, a young man that she called the Spook. In Carolina's words, quote, Gordana said that there was this fellow bothering her at work, hanging around and bugging her, and she didn't like him. The Spook ended up coming to the deli so often that Gordana quit her job there. She didn't know him. I think he just saw her at the deli once and got carried away with her. Gordana described the spook as being of Middle Eastern or possibly Italian origin, and that he sometimes appeared with a blonde, surfer-looking friend. Unfortunately, to this day, nobody has been able to pinpoint exactly who the spook was, though forensic artists were able to come up with this sketch. Is it possible that the eyewitness's description may have been slightly off, and that these two men are actually one and the same? After all, it seems likely that the spook and his blonde surfer mate were the ones responsible. The Australian authorities strongly believe that there are numerous people out there that hold vital information pertaining to Gordana's case. A $1 million award is on offer to anyone who can help bring her family closure and bring these perps to justice. So, I hope that these cases highlighted the danger of being taken to a second location. To be clear, this advice doesn't apply to standard robberies. Just give those guys what they want, because no amount of cash is worth your life. But if ever a perp tries to make you get inside a vehicle, do whatever it takes to avoid that. If they tell you to stay quiet, that's your signal to start screaming for help. If they tell you to get inside a car, that's when you sprint for your life. Fight if you have to, or know how to, because no matter how your would-be captor reacts, statistically, your odds of surviving that encounter go up dramatically if you don't get in that vehicle. Compliance is not an option. They're banking on you playing ball. They'll tell you that they won't hurt you if you simply comply. Don't believe them. Wherever they're taking you, it's going to serve them a lot better than it serves you. Whatever is waiting for you there, it's worse than anything they can do to you at the primary location. And even if you're terribly injured in your escape, it's better for help to be minutes away in a public place rather than hours away in who knows where. And with all that said, I hope you enjoyed today's video. I'd like to say a huge thank you to all of my supporters here on YouTube and over on Patreon, especially my biggest supporters. That one guy Thomas, Jessie Jug, Alex Greensall, Anya Yekaterina Faustov, Asiamina, Azrael Warakai, Beatrice Matarazzo, Chief Cochuaque, Colin Monsma, Connor Louthan, Crawford K. McDonald, Expand Dong, George Lopez, Gina Valera, Grace Archie, Infamous-senpapi, Kawaii, Larry Mattingly, Leonardo Martinez, Myra Lancaster, Monica Mendoza, Natalie Escobedo, Peter Loggerage, Philip Wester, Taylor&Monica Gruenk, The Only Dorita, Wagner Thompson, Zane, Mrs. Yvonne Rankin, The Deck of Cards, Hamish K, Nephus 1988, and Lydia Glassley. Thank you guys so much for your continued support. Make sure you're subscribed if you're not already, and hit that bell icon so you never miss an upload. Until the next one, guys, you all stay spooky. And remember, the best things happen in the dark.